Good morning. This is Denny Paul May and Brenda Combs coming to you live from the Holler Studios, where we both realized this morning that we think we can count to 100.
I think we can too.
And so certainly we're going to look at some more of the topics from the IEP guidance document. We're going to continue our journey through the IEP guidance document. And today's topics are going to be specially designed instruction, and then our next video will be looking at what's required as in regards to transition for the high school students. And so today we're going to talk to you a little bit from page 51 in the IEP guidance document, and we're going to just talk about what special design instruction is, and then Brenda's going to dive a little deeper below the surface, and we're going to have her talk to you a little bit about the IEP lesson plan and development handbook that sometimes we refer to as the schoolhouse document. So what is special design instruction? The definition for that in the guidance document just says basically it's what the teacher does to instruct, assess, and reteach the student. It's what they do a little differently in the methodology in the classrooms for students with disabilities that go a little deeper, a little differentiated, a little further beyond what the core instruction is for the classroom. And so certainly, when we talk about the methodology, the content, and the delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the student. And when you go back to that whole big piece that we talk about a lot in special education, the free, appropriate public education, and what it means to deliver that, certainly specially designed instruction is a key piece in delivering and making sure that we're doing what needs to be done to meet the unique needs of our students, to make the IEP ambitious, to make the goals ambitious, and that so that we can say, yes, definitively, we've provided the IEP, we've given the instruction that needs to be given. And specially designed instruction really is rooted in research-based methods. So we need to make sure that they're methods that have been tried and that they've really been worked on in the classroom, and that there is some research behind that shows these are effective methods for students with disabilities so that they can learn and they can make progress within the curriculum and also on the goals.
And Denny Paul's certainly right with that, especially when he said unique. All students learn differently, and we know that. So we need to change our instruction to where all kids can learn instead of just shooting at a certain population of students. So, like I said, special education students, they're all different. Even your regular education students are all different, and regular education students can learn from this as well. So when you're looking at the IEP handbook, and it was developed in 2014, and I heard they were going to have a new one come out, but then I also heard that it's still on the back burner. So I don't know when that will come out. I do hope that it comes out this school year, because it is an old document and some of those things have changed that are in there. But for those that do know, and we call it the schoolhouse document because it's got the big red schoolhouse on the front of it. Within that document, it talks about the different types of instructions, and it talks about the different specially designed instructions that you can use for your classroom. And the first one that it talks about is your explicit instruction, and Denny Paul will talk to you about that a little bit more in depth. But that it's a great instruction, but like I said, he's going to talk about that a little bit more. Then you have scaffolded instruction, and a lot of our kids have to have that scaffolded instruction, especially for those that have cognitive disabilities. Even the ones that are specific learning disabilities may need the scaffolded instruction as well, just breaking down those components. The other one is just strategy instructions that we need to have for the kids. Direct instruction, a lot of our kids, we have to be right up front. We have to direct it. It's right toward the student, so it's more direct instruction in their classwork. Then we have some tiers that we need to look at because some of our kiddos are still in tiers in certain areas that still may also have an IEP. So there's several things that we can look at throughout this document that we're talking about, but we're actually going through the specially designed instruction. for those students, and we must have that in our IEP document because it will not be compliant if we leave that part out. Again, they do have a bank for that. However, sometimes that bank may not have what we need, and then you can type in whatever you think that you need for that student. Remember, we don't want cookie cutter IEPs. We don't want them to look alike. Each kid is different. They don't have the same specially designed instruction, those types of things. So we need to be aware of all that as we're completing our IEP. So when you look over in on page 4, it starts with your explicit instruction, and then it carries on into the scaffolding instruction. And then it also has, what I like about this is on page 7 of that document, it talks about those steps for your scaffolding instruction. And there's 6 steps for that. And I can briefly go over those, but I hate to read to you. But anyway, it's present a new strategy or a skill through modeling. And so we may be thinking of maybe a think aloud, for an example. Then we have to adjust that level of difficulty during guided practice. So guided practice does play a very important role in this specially designed instruction, because the more guided practice they get, the better off they're going to learn. So there's different ways of developing that, and it's like starting with adaptive materials if you need that, like start with the level of complexity and then gradually increase, and completing part of the task and then or the activity that you're going to be doing with the student. Provide a form of cueing system. Some of our students may need visual cueing. Present learning materials in small steps, so we're just going to be doing increments. Develop student errors, determine student errors and areas of difficulty. So we need to be quick about when you're determining those areas, because they need that quick feedback with our children. The next step is number 3, and that's to provide multiple means of student practice. And again, scaffolding should be, to inspire those kids to want to learn and to increase their understanding. Then we have ways of doing those, and that's teacher-led, reciprocal teaching. That's just a dialogue between the teacher and the student. Cooperative groups, we can put them in groups. And co-teaching, you'll find that it works very well when you're doing parallel teaching, when you're doing station teaching, those types of things. And with our special education students, alternative teaching is another great strategy that you can use. The 4th step is to provide multiple variations for feedback. Again, that can be student-led. It could also be a checklist. It can also be just walking around, thumbs up, thumbs down, and models of student work samples. Remember, those kids have to have some type of sample or example to look at so they will know what the exemplar ones look like. We can't assume that they know that. The 5th one is to increase level of student responsibility. Now, we talk about this all the time. The students should be responsible for their education. Yes, they need to be. And this helps with that. It helps to increase that level of student responsibility. So we may want to fade props and models, and then gradually increase the level of complexity of materials, reduce the student instructional supports. So, we may want to pull some things away, or we may need to add a few things, just depending. And then combine steps of skills through practice, because that's how they learn, is through the practicing. Check the student for mastery's level of skill. If we don't check for that, how do we know that they even understand how to do that skill? And then the last step is independent practice. This is where they practice on their own. There's little time wasted in scaffolding the lessons. All learning goals are achieved effectively, and you can do that with providing large amounts of practice and facilitating application of new situations, just depending on your student. Again, they do have the different pieces of that, and I won't go in depth with that. You can look through that when you go through your document. It talks about your strategy instruction, And all that is a method of teaching students techniques, principles, and rules applicable in many learning situations that guide them to complete the task independently. And I emphasize independently because that is the word that we need to look at right there. It also goes to the teaching strategies of scaffolding, all of that in this document. I won't go through that again. That's on page 8 if you want to look for that. And then direct instruction. We all do a lot of direct instruction in our classrooms as we go out and we look and we're observing. We see that happening, and that's a good thing. It's research-based approach where the teacher systematically and explicitly presents strategies and content following those 6 steps within that process. And again, I won't go into all those steps, but you can look at those and in the document. And it talks about our tiered instruction, and again, that's another instructional practice. All these are instructional practices for teaching one concept to meet the varied needs for the individual students. It also talks about using more concrete representational abstract instructional approach. And a lot of our students have to be able to see what they're doing. They have to have that concrete doing with concrete materials, objects, those types of things. And then the representational is seeing by using semi-concrete objects, and that may be something like pictures. Then, of course, the abstract, you're taking all of that away, and it's more symbolic at that time. And then we have mimicking, and of course, that just helps the students improve with their memory of new information, because sometimes it's hard for those to even remember what they already have stored there to bring it back out to add the new pieces that we're trying to teach. So we have to know those pieces as well. But I'm going to hand it back over to Denny Paul and let him talk a little bit about John O'Connor.
Yes. So just kind of recap a little bit. If you're looking at those pages, those first few pages in the document, the schoolhouse document, Brenda did a very good job of breaking down what's in there. The thing that I want to point out is it's so rooted in the teaching and the instructional methods of Anita Archer and the explicit instruction model. Scaffolding is just so rooted in the instructional model that is provided through the explicit instruction model. And when you're talking about providing those experiences, giving those examples, those non-examples, when you're talking about giving plenty of time for practice, when you're talking about scaffolding that information for your students with disabilities and holding their hand, so to speak, and stepping them down and making it a little more complex and making them a little more independent as we go. I think that's the whole intent of that document. And then being able to discern the difference between what a special design instruction is and what supplementary aids and services are. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But, we have a twofold charge in special education. As special education teachers, we have to look at, yes, we have to provide a rich, ambitious, goals-oriented IEP that's going to remediate or work toward closing the gap on discrete skills. If we're talking about reading, writing, math, whatever it might be, we're going to have to work on those discrete skills to close that gap so that when we look at adverse effect, we're looking at where the student is actually performing right now and how much can we move them in a year to a little closer performance that's more similar to that of their grade level. And so when we do that, we also have to provide them access to the general curriculum. So we're working on discrete skills on one hand, but we're also working on providing the access to the general curriculum. So we have to write our IEPs in a way that they're standards-based. We have to have research behind the strategies that we're using because we want to see that progress, and we have to capture that with progress monitoring. So when we go into talking about special design instruction, we understand that it can be provided in a resource room, yes, but it also can be provided in a co-teaching model. The IEP guidance document is pretty clear, and the law is pretty clear that the first time special design instruction is actually presented to a student with disability, it needs to be provided by either a special education teacher that is certified or a related service provider if it's something like speech. So we need to keep that in mind, and we need to make sure that we understand why we are doing what we're doing, and we're looking at what the teacher does differently. What is it different from the core instruction? And it really is necessary for the student to make progress. It's planned, designed, and initially delivered by the special education teacher. It's required to a degree or an intensity that's not available to all students. And it's instruction that's required for the student to learn to use assistive technology devices, materials, strategies, or services. So we certainly want to think about that as we move and take this journey through the IEP guidance document. This is really the core crux. This is the anchor piece when you're talking about what we're doing with our students in terms of instructing them differently, providing them with different examples, providing them with scaffolding, providing them with all of these different types of instructional strategies that are rooted in research and that are going to get them to move a little bit closer to grade level performance, similar grade level performance, and close that achievement gap. And that's what we're all about. And we certainly have to capture that, and it's important that we capture that and document that the correct way. Now, the role of the teacher in SDI is very clear. The special education teacher must provide that SDI the first time it's provided. Now, in a co-teaching situation, your regular ed teacher can support that, and once it's provided the first time, there certainly can be some parallel teaching in a co-teaching situation where a regular ed teacher, once they have heard that instruction or seen how that instruction is done differentially, then they are allowed to provide that a secondary time or in a review or that type of thing. So we need to keep that in mind as we are providing these things for our students in co-teaching, because there's a lot of co-teaching going on out there. And when we're doing those groups, we need to think about, hey, are we putting them in groups of 6 and 7, which research says is the best way to teach students with disabilities and to close that achievement gap? Also to teach those kids that may not be students with disabilities, but also in a co-teaching situation who may have some gaps in their learning but don't qualify for special education. And so when we heard John O'Connor talk about that, he really challenged us in that training to think about what our special design instruction list might look like. If we were going to write down a list and we were going to say, hey, what's special design instruction for me? What does it mean to me as a special educator? Do I have some preloaded strategies? Do I have some tried and true research-based methods that I can provide for each student that's coming my way on my caseload? Because I know when I come to school in August, I know there's going to be reading problems. There's going to be, within reading, there's going to be fluency problems. There's going to be phonemic awareness issues. There's going to be comprehension issues. And those are all things that we can expect, so we can be ready for that. If we know what those strategies are around that, then we can have those front loaded. And then same for math, same for writing, same for behavior. And if we're ready for that and we have some preloaded upfront strategies ready to go, then we certainly can handle those things that come our way. But he talked a little bit about a list, and he talked about, what should special design instruction look like. And first and foremost, he felt like explicit instruction was very, very important. And I'm going to kind of recap his list, and it's kind of become my list because I kind of believe as I read further and look at the research that he has a great list here. So explicit instruction, where you're providing a review, you're activating prior knowledge, you're telling the student explicitly what's going to happen, you're giving them concrete examples first, you're giving them examples and non-examples, you're providing a lot of time for repetition and skill practice, and you're giving immediate feedback. And so certainly within that explicit instruction model, and then at some point you're going to say, you know what, we feel like they're independent enough they can try this on their own. And that's what special design instruction is really about. So we're really holding their hand up front, and we're letting go a little bit at a time, and we're getting them to where they can be more independent and their performance is more similar to the grade level that they're in. And so that's what explicit instruction is. And then, of course, within that explicit instruction, he talks a lot about making sure that our students who have difficulties with reading and writing, making sure that they have a good, solid background and also a good, explicit experience in teaching vocabulary. If it's in science or if it's in social studies or if it's in math, you can't learn it unless you understand the terms that are involved in that instruction. And so when we're talking about special design instruction, we need to be thinking about, hey, how can I explicitly teach this child? What do they need individually that's going to work for them? How much practice do they need? How much immediate feedback do they need? How much independent practice do they need? And then also, as we're moving them through the curriculum, we're giving them access to it by providing those good teaching qualities with that vocabulary. And then beyond that, I would say the third one, and this may not be John O'Connor's third one, but it's my third one, is making sure that we're giving our students a chance to respond, that they are responding in different ways. They're writing, they're talking to their neighbor, they're doing oral responses. We're doing closed procedures if we're reading something from the board, maybe a new definition, and we're allowing them to make sure that they're engaged. So that engagement and that responsiveness is built into our teaching so that we're getting multiple responses every day when we're teaching them specially designed instruction, and we're getting those responses from them. What's going to happen in that? Once we start getting those types of responses, is we're going to see students really form relationships with teachers, and we're going to have less and less behavior. And we know that this is rooted in research, but the research says the more engaged the student is, the more you have them involved, and the more you have them on their toes, knowing that they're going to have to give something back to you either through a written response on a whiteboard or through a verbal response or responding to their neighbor and putting an answer together and someone calling it out. So we need to be thinking about how can we elicit student response at a high level every day, that we have a bell-to-bell teaching, have them respond. And then I would go right into talking about my fourth one would be retrieval of information from a blank slate. The research says the more we have our students practice retrieving information that has just been presented or was presented a few minutes ago or was presented a few days ago, and we continue to go back to it, the more we're going to have connections made for students with disabilities. It kind of unlocks the gate. It kind of opens the door for them so that they can learn at a higher level, and then they can retrieve information. In order to be a good retriever of information, you have to practice retrieving information from a blank slate. And so I would consider that one of the top specially designed instruction pursuits that we have. If it's just recalling what you just did and having them write it down 2 times, or recalling what you did yesterday and making that permanent and putting some gap in it, coming back to that concept. And really the goal for education then is to have permanent learning. And then the other thing I would throw in there, number 5, would be that we would teach our students to be organized. Students with disabilities have a lot of problems around organization. They lose things. They have a hard time keeping up with things. They have a hard time keeping up with things on the paper. They have some difficulties reading, writing, some of those basic skills, and sometimes they get lost in the process. So we need to teach them to be organized, show them the graphic organizers, provide for them that scaffold information that Brenda was talking about earlier, provide for them some tools where they can be assisted to get the right answer, and then we can slowly move that assistance away and make them independent. So that would be number 5. And then number 6, I would have them thinking about, hey, can you reflect on what you've just learned? Can you think about your learning? There's a big word that we use sometimes, metacognition, and it simply means that we're able to reflect and we're able to think about what we just learned. We're able to think about our thinking, and we're able to express that some way. So we certainly build that into our special design instruction list as we move forward, and we think about the things that we can do for students with disabilities, that we can move them, that we can close that achievement gap, and that we can really, really be intentional about what we're doing. So we're having front-loaded, up front, ready to go strategies that are going to work for students with disabilities. And if we're in a co-teaching situation, we carve out time to work with that co-teacher and to kind of get our game plan together, because if you're doing co-teaching, you should both be teaching. And we should be taking shared responsibility in that teaching and providing these students, not only students with disabilities, but all students, with good core instruction. Everybody gets good core instruction, and then also good specially designed instruction. And so that in and of itself is in a great book, Great Achievement, that John O'Connor wrote, and certainly it's made an impact on us as educators as we've kind of went below the surface with Anita Archer, and then also with John O'Connor. We really feel like that's the cornerstone pieces of forming good teaching in special design instruction on the IEP. And that's certainly something that's so important, and that's why we wanted to spend this time talking to you about this today, and we really appreciate your time. We'll be coming to you in our next video. We'll be talking to you about what's required for students that are 13 and above in regards to transition. It's actually 14 and grade 8 for certain things, and then it's age 16 what you have to have for that. So we thank you for your time today. Brenda and I really appreciate this opportunity to share with you, and hope this has been something that's going to be beneficial for you as you seek to serve those students with disabilities in a special way.